Oh, that should have been the cue for me right there. Okay, let's do it again. I don't need to do the intro though, so here we go.
Yeah, so what is sex trafficking? And then the next, so it's actually Patty, Sally, not Bella, not you. But Patty, Sally, Rachel, do you, any of you want to tell us what sex trafficking is or what you have heard that it is?
Hi Tara, hi Amber and everyone. I mean, I've heard a lot of things, and I feel like some of that has come from like TV shows like SVU or whatever. Some of it has come from regular news media. And then some of it has come through like a few workers that I actually know. And I would say those definitions are different.
Right. So usually when I ask that, people say that it has something to do with travel, like transporting people for prostitution, or they say that it means forcing people into prostitution. And none of those are any legal definition of prostitution, basically, or any legal definition of sex trafficking. So we have the popular understanding of sex trafficking, which people think is like a stranger kidnaps you and forces you into prostitution, which of course is not something that happens very often. We have criminal, it's a crime, it's a legal term, right? And so every state has their own definition of sex trafficking in their state laws, and some of those make sense and some of them don't. Here in Alaska, ours don't really make sense. They include almost everything that independent sex workers do, or especially when sex workers work together, which we do for safety, and you guys all know about that. We have state non-criminal definitions. So the Alaska Network on Sex and DVSA, the Alaska Network on Domestic Violence and Sexual Assault, has a definition of sex trafficking that includes all commercialized vice. So like a liquor store or pull tabs would be sex trafficking. And it also includes just plain old seduction. Sex trafficking. Oh, is that me?
Nope, that's me. Sorry.
Oh no. Federally, we also have criminal and non-criminal definitions at the federal level, and those, of course, are different from our state criminal and non-criminal definitions. So because of all of these different definitions and how none of them mean what people think sex trafficking means, it's very important for us to use like really specific language when we talk about sex trafficking, because nobody knows what you mean, or if they do know what you mean, they, they're confused about the word. So if you're talking about forced labor in the sex industry, just say that. If you're talking about domestic violence against a sex worker, right, that's something that legally is sex trafficking, but none of us really thinks that it is. Or if you're just talking about like teenagers who are doing drugs and having sex at parties, say that. It's less confusing if we can all say what we mean and mean what we say in a way that other people can understand. Okay, next slide. So the Alaska's new sex trafficking law that we have now, it's changed a little bit since then, but it's basically the same, was passed in 2012. And the first case to be charged under that new law was a sex worker and a masseuse named Ka&en. I remember Ka&en because she used to work here in Fairbanks, and she actually just hung signs at the coffee shop. You're looking at like there's puppies for sale and there's Ka&en, and she just very blatantly on her advertisement for her massage business was like, and additionally these sexual services for these prices. And I was like, oh God, she is going to get arrested. And I wanted to tell her, like, you're you're going to get arrested. But I was like, if I text her, then when she gets arrested, my number is going to be on her phone. So I didn't, but she moved to Kenai about the time that the new trafficking law went into effect. And she had a massage studio down there. And there were two women who were renting a room from her for their work as sex workers as well. And a police officer came undercover. He got a massage from her. He said, hey, I saw on your prices that you like also offer these companionship services. And she said, yes. And he said, well, can I get another appointment tomorrow? And I saw there's two other women who are available at this here. And she said, well, I would have to call them and see if they would be available tomorrow. And they called and only one of them was. But the officer came back the next day for the appointment. He handed the money to Ka&en. Instead of handing them each their money, he handed all of the money to Ka&en for her to split. And they charged her with, I think it was like 7 or 8 counts of sex trafficking for receiving the money for another person's prostitution, for having a place of prostitution, for booking the call for the prostitution. One of the women who worked out of that space was over 21, but she advertised that she was only 18. So they tried to charge her with trafficking somebody who was under 21, even though the woman was actually like 25. They charged her also with prostitution, and they charged both of the women with prostitution. She was convicted of an unclassified felony of sex trafficking in the 1st degree. Yeah, so that's Ka&en's case, and that's not what we think that sex trafficking is. And of course, they charged her clients too, which is something they do in sex trafficking cases, because that way they don't have to prove that there was prostitution in her sex trafficking case. They can say there was prostitution, and we know because we've convicted these customers of it. Next slide. And then the second case to be charged in 2013 was also a sex worker. And we're just going to call her Celia. It's not her real name. But Celia came up to Fairbanks to work from Anchorage, and she happened to look a lot like another woman who had just come up to Fairbanks to work from Anchorage. And that woman was robbing customers. One of the customers called the Fairbanks Police Department. They got on Craigslist and did a sting on Celia, who was up here dancing, but she got off work one night and then wanted to make a little bit more money. So she put an ad up advertising her time for money. And I put Alaska State Trooper on there, but that's my mistake. It was actually the Fairbanks Police Department. Responded to her ad, and he, showed up at her room and said, here's the money, but are you going to give me a blowjob for this money? What are you going to do for this money? How is it going to be worth my time? And she told him over and over, I'm not selling any sex acts. That's illegal in Alaska. If you're trying to buy sex, you need to leave. I'm only selling my time. And of course, we're going to have a good time, right? They arrested her, and they charged her with sex trafficking in the 4th degree, which is just aiding or facilitating prostitution. So she was charged with aiding or facilitating her own prostitution, with sex trafficking herself. And when this law was created, just a year and a half before, they had Polaris Project come in and do a training for the legislature, and police and politicians were down there talking about how this law was going to be used to protect children and vulnerable women. But these were the only 2 cases to be charged in 2012 and 2013, the first few years of the law, and they had only used the law against the people they were saying they were going to use it to protect. And Celia's lawyer made the same argument. He actually quoted the governor's letter and said the governor and the legislators were very clear. They're talking about people who do things to sex workers, not about sex workers themselves. And so, next slide, I think. So the state dropped the charges. They dismissed the charges. They refiled it as a prostitution case, and then that ended up being dismissed as well. But back then, you couldn't get things removed from court view if you weren't convicted like you can now. So Celia's advisors at school told her she should just drop out because she was in a healthcare certification program. And they said, nobody will ever hire you to work with vulnerable people if you have a sex trafficking charge on your record. Because, you know, they're not going to know that it's for sex trafficking herself, and they're not going to care that she wasn't convicted of it. Sex trafficking sounds like a big thing. Next slide.
And this is me. So to summarize the Ka&en's case and Celia's case, those are the only cases to be charged under the new 2012 law through the end of 2013. So I'm not going to go through all of the same things there, but so we're looking at people charged with trafficking a minor was 0. People charged with forcing someone into prostitution is 0. Allegations of force, fraud, or coercion is 0. But out of the 2 people that were charged under that new law, 100% of them were sex workers. So moving into 2014, we have the Alaska State Troopers, Anchorage Police Department, and Department of Law continuing to use the sex trafficking statute against people that they really pretended it was intended to help. So out of 5 cases that year, there were 2 sex workers charged, and there was 1 allegation of force, fraud, or coercion. So despite the 3 years of having the statute and no charges of trafficking of a minor, police, prosecutors, and politicians continue to pretend the statute was about rescuing children who were being forced into prostitution. And that's when we're going to talk a little bit about my case right here. So in 2014, I was charged with 8 felony counts of sex trafficking. And this was essentially for having a place of prostitution because I was working as a sex worker with other people. Some of them were my friends. Some people just kind of contacted me. And I was providing booking and screening services for other sex workers. When I went to bail out, my bail conditions were very strict. I had ankle monitor and a third-party person. So, and I was also completely outed in the press. I had 2 children. My daughter was, I think, 13 at the time. My son was 18 at the time. And at my sentencing, the prosecutor repeated several times that the fact I had not abused any sex workers was irrelevant, right? It was because they were not charging me with abusing anyone. They were charging me with running what they called a successful escort agency. So because that law had changed the wording from a promoting prostitution, which was really just a misdemeanor, a class A misdemeanor, a low offense, I was, able to be charged with all of those felony counts. I was completely overcharged with 8 counts. And sadly, even the people around me were really kind of caught up in this too. They actually arrested my husband, who really didn't have anything to do with my stuff. I had already been working as a sex worker for 10 years. I had just married him like a year or 2 before. He worked at a car dealership place. And they actually went and arrested him, and they utilized him as a plea bargain. So this, they're like, Amber, you have all these. If you plead to a class B felony, we're going to make sure he doesn't do any jail time. And I felt really guilty because he didn't have anything to do with things. So, and he'd just pick up the laundry for me sometimes. It was a strong tactic for that plea deal. So I pled guilty to 1 count of sex trafficking in the 2nd degree, and I was given 5.5 years to serve.
So, and I remember when Amber's case happened, one of the women who, I remember she had like come to Alaska to work on her own, and then she ended up working using Amber's place for like a couple of weeks or something. And then she was staying with some other friends of mine, and the police kept trying to contact her about Amber. And she realized that anybody that she stayed with would be in danger of, something similar as what happened to Amber happening to them. And she became so afraid to stay with any of her friends and ended up like staying in this hostel and being homeless for a little while, and it was crazy. And then she jumped off the roof of the travel lodge, I think it was, in Anchorage. So it had a lot of impact on a lot of people, not just Amber.
Yeah.
Sorry. Yin was another sex worker who was charged in 2014 with 2 felony counts of sex trafficking in the 3rd degree, which is just having a place of prostitution, for being a sex worker and sharing her space with other sex workers in a parlor. So massage parlors can be really good places to work because every customer that comes in, their expectation is that you're going to give them a regular massage for a set amount of money, and that probably when you get to the end, you might offer them a hand job. But they're not walking in presuming that they're going to get full service or anything like that, right? So you can provide whatever level of services you feel comfortable with, and you can change what services you want to provide for different clients or on different days. Whereas like if you're an internet escort who advertises online, like you're advertising your prices and you can't just change them every day or change them every client. You have to kind of do what you advertised on the internet. Massage parlors also are more safe because, oh, sorry, can you go back?
Sorry. Yeah, sorry.
Massage parlors also are more safe because of course there's other women there if anything happens. So the FBI's Project Innocence Lost and Anchorage PD were involved in this investigation, which went on for years and years. They had a lot of surveillance cameras, and they went in several times to get services and build a case that there was prostitution happening in there. So during all those times that they went in and got a massage from a lady, and the lady said, you know, do you want anything additional? And then the officer said, well, how much is it to have sex? The only sex worker who agreed to have sex with them for money, like penis and vagina sex, was Yin herself. The other sex workers all said that they did not provide full service. They said one of them like made a face like, oh, that would hurt. So then also during the different investigations, the officers noted that different workers quoted them different prices. So one woman is selling a hand job for $40, one woman selling a hand job for $60. They're all setting their own prices. And of course, the price might be different for different clients or on different days. Okay, next slide. So in the charging documents, they said that Yin was a sex trafficker. They acknowledged that they weren't accusing her of actually doing anything to anybody in particular, but they said that the woman who worked there, and most of the women who worked there had been working there for like 10 or 20 years, and you would see, customers talking about them online, like, that had just been seeing them for years, and most of them were in their 50s or 60s, and had been coming to Alaska and working for 10 or 20 years. So they said in the charging documents that these were sex trafficking victims who had been set on automatic. So they said, some traffickers will travel with the victim to monitor their activities and collect the money, but other traffickers send their girls, they call us girls, not women, even though they're talking about women in their 50s and 60s, on automatic, where the girls travel by themselves but are expected to check in with the pimp and send him money from the Commercial Sex Act. So nobody was charged. There were no pimps in the lower 48 who were charged related to this. Nobody was charged with doing anything to anybody else in this case, right? But look at how they talk about us. We're having sex in a way that they don't approve of. And that means that somebody else is controlling us and we're not in control of ourselves, because it cannot possibly be that women are capable of setting our own terms of consent and giving meaningful consent to sex. This is a really big deal that they're calling us girls. They're referring to women in their 60s as girls in an effort to infantilize them, and they're going through all of this crazy background stuff to set the stage that we are not capable of giving meaningful consent to sex or not. And this really matters, because if the courts can just come in and say, well, she said yes, but she doesn't know, she's not morally capable of it, they can do the same thing when we say no, and we're going to be living in the Handmaid's Tale. Okay, next slide. So this is how the charging documents describe one of the detectives, Detective Doja Q, I believe's interaction with a woman who they believed was a sex trafficking victim. It says, after 40 minutes into the massage, Detective Doja Q told the woman to save some time for his front. And I know from my training and experience that workers in massage parlors know this to mean to save some of the time for the sexual conduct. After the woman finished massaging his back and arms, he turned around onto his back, facing up on the massage table. When the woman was standing by his right side, he pulled down the towel and looked at her. He pointed it to his penis with his left hand and motioned like having being manually masturbated with his right hand. The woman looked at the door that was ajar to the room and then looked back down over Detective Doja Q's penis and reached her hand under the towel, touching his penis. So we keep the doors are ajar, right? So that other people can hear you if you scream or if anything goes wrong. And there's, probably somebody kind of watching down the hallway, maybe on cameras, to make sure that the doors stay open a little bit so that people can hear if anything goes wrong. And so then it says, after she started touching his penis, Detective Doja Q gave the predetermined takedown signal and the entry team entered the business. Okay, next slide. So in 2015, the statute was used 6 times. There was still nobody charged with trafficking a minor. There was one person charged with forcing somebody into prostitution. There were 2 allegations of force, fraud, or coercion. So they're starting to get a higher rate of things that are actually harming somebody. And they charged 1 sex trafficking victim with sex trafficking. This was also the year that during the legislative session, the sex trafficking statute was changed again in Senate Bill 91, which we lobbied for, to stop the state from charging sex workers with trafficking ourselves and from charging us with the lower levels of sex trafficking unless we're accused of inducing somebody into prostitution or using force, fraud, or force under the state law, right? And this resulted actually in the state having to drop all of Yin's charges because she was only charged with having a place of prostitution and she wasn't charged with inducing or forcing. Okay, next slide. So Haley, again, not her real name, was somebody who's known to our community as a victim of very violent, long-term domestic violence from a guy who we would call a pimp, but was her boyfriend. And, he would go to jail and she would get away from him and she would be picking up the pieces and doing good in her life. And then he would get out of jail and start to abuse her again and things would go downhill again. So when he was arrested, which he absolutely should have been, they arrested her as well, and they charged her as his co-defendant, even though he had done all of these things that he had done to the other woman to her and to her for much longer and probably much worse. But they charged her as his co-defendant with 7 counts of sex trafficking. And when you are a mother and you go to jail and the state takes your kids, you have 25 months to regain custody of your kids or parental rights are just automatically terminated. So she took a plea deal that let her get out of jail in order to avoid the termination of her parental rights, even though, well, she probably couldn't. I don't know. I felt like she had a good chance if she took it to trial, but it could have taken more than 25 months to get to trial.
Yeah, I agree.
So many people have the misconception that the crime of sex trafficking means that there is a victim and something has happened to them in the sex industry, but that is not the case. So this is an example of a case here in Alaska that most people would think of as just a case of child sexual abuse or sexual abuse of a minor. This guy, Roy Carter, it was alleged that when the FBI received a tip alleging that a minor had been sexually abused by him approximately 15 times over the course of 3 years, with the first instance occurring when the victim was just 10 years old. But he allegedly gave the victim money after each instance of sexual abuse and often gave her alcohol and marijuana. The complaint further alleges places that the abuse happened, right? So because he gave her money and gave her drugs and gave her alcohol, the case is charged as sex trafficking instead of sexual abuse of a minor. And this is really harmful to a 13-year-old child, I think, who is being told that they're a sex trafficking victim. Because it's really when you're a sex trafficking victim, all of the professionals tell you, oh, you're never going to be able to have a healthy relationship. You're going to be a drug addict. You're going to be homeless. You're going to have a horrible life. You're broken beyond all repair. And that's really harmful. And it's a really harmful stigma to put on a child who has only been, not only, but who has been sexually abused and has not been trafficked in the sex industry. And it also, right, helps to raise their numbers of sex trafficking cases. This is the first case, I believe. No, it's not. There was an earlier one, but this was one of, a case like this was the only trafficking of a minor case that had been filed in Alaska in like a 9-year period. But they can say, we arrested somebody for sex trafficking a kid finally, right? Okay, and then the next slide. So then there's also this misconception that if somebody's being charged with sex trafficking, there is an actual victim who exists, somebody who has been sex trafficked. But this is another example of a different kind of case, right? Where in this case, a man agreed to pay for sex with minors, but there were no actual minors involved. They were fictitious minors that the FBI was pimping out on the internet. And there were 2 of these imaginary minors that the FBI was pimping out. And so they got him on 2 counts, I believe. And when we look at federal sex trafficking cases and federal trafficking of a minor cases, the victims in the trafficking of minor cases are usually imaginary. They're being pimped out by undercover FBI agents, but they can take those numbers and they can turn around and say, children are being forced into prostitution because people think that's what sex trafficking means. And we need, bigger and badder laws and more money. And it's a big money train. But when we look at the actual cases, a lot of them look like this. Slide.
I know we're at the end, but Tara, you had stated that you had some other ones, but also I cannot see the chat, so I don't know if people have any questions as well.
Oh, I can look in the chat. I don't see anything, nothing in there. Yeah, so we could talk about cases, and I forget the guy's name in the one case, but there was a case that we reported where a guy, and I thought it was interesting because another thing that we hear about sex trafficking a lot is that it's all about money and that these traffickers are becoming rich. And it's this huge multi-billion-dollar worldwide industry, but for some reason, all the pimps I know are really poor and homeless and stuff. But anyways, in this case, this guy was meeting up with young women with teenagers, minors, on dating websites. And he was a child molester who had a fascination with the idea of like turning a 15 or 16 or 17-year-old girl into a sex worker. That was his thing. And so he put ads on the internet for them and everything. He didn't make any money from it. It wasn't a business. He was a child abuser. What's another case, Amber?
Well, what happened with him? Are you talking about Alex Asino?
Yes, that's the one.
So,
Yeah,
how
so
you can tell the story about how he actually was arrested.
Oh yeah, so there was a guy who was posting some things online that were really concerning, and it looked like he was assaulting sex workers, but also he posted reviews of a lot of us. So he would post reviews like he had assaulted a street-based sex worker, but then he was also posting reviews of other sex workers that he apparently was not assaulting, but we couldn't figure out who he was, and we were just trying to get his phone number so that we could let ladies know to watch out for him. So we're chatting with him on the website. I was pretending to be another customer, and then we were like, we gotta get him to a phone number somehow, but I knew he was smart enough that he would search my phone number and see that it was registered to a woman and figure out who I was. And so I think I just sent a text to the group chat and was like, does anybody have like a number that's registered to a guy that we could use? And somebody was like, oh yeah, this friend of mine, he'll do it, right? So I told him, like, he was trying to send me pictures on Pornhub, and I was like, oh, like Pornhub, I'm banned from Pornhub, so text him to me. So he started texting this guy, and right away, like within like 5 texts, he starts telling this guy that this young lady that he's been posting saying that she's 18, and that he's just been seeing her for a few months. He tells him that, she's not actually 18 yet, and that he has been having sex with her since she was quite underage, and had introduced her to having sex for money, and now she loves it, and he's, putting ads on the internet and stuff for her. He just came out and said all of that. So we called the FBI, and they had us, like transfer him to their phone. We were like, you're saying a lot of stuff, like we're gonna have to text you from a different number. And then the FBI guy texted. So and then he continued, and it turned out that he was actually at the time on ankle monitor, on pretrial, or maybe just house arrest, on pretrial in a case where he was being charged with sexual abuse of a minor as well. But in that case, Anchorage PD had confiscated his phone, but I guess they hadn't really searched it. So he told the undercover FBI agent how to, like, you can put this encrypted drive on your phone. You can keep all your child porn on there. And he was like, APD has my phone and they haven't found it. So he was charged with sex trafficking and with child pornography and a bunch of things. And then I think he pled to maybe one of the charges, and his sentence was not as much as I thought it should be, because he's a pretty young guy.
Yeah, that reminds me, I need to look up and see what he was sentenced to. It would be good to see that.
I want to say, I know the last time we did this, I was wrong. I said it was like 7 years, but it was actually like 25 or 20 or something like that.
I would hope so. Since nobody has any questions right now, I mean, there's no wrong questions, so you can ask away. I know we have some new faces. Hi, Rachel. Do you have any questions?
Not really. I mean, I feel like I'm learning a lot, and it's great to be here. So, yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah, of course. Oh, actually, I do have a question. Is there like is there a database or a website where, and forgive me for not knowing full verse of your guys' website, where all of these stories are like tracked? Where these
So
people are listed?
Rachel, we're working on that right now. There is like a report, which you saw some screenshots from.
Yeah.
The Alaska Department of Law stopped responding to my records requests back in 2019, I think was the last year that they did. And then I just recently made a complaint to the Ombudsman's office about that. And then the Department of Law fulfilled my most recent records request about like 5 days ago or something.
Okay, great.
So yeah, what we have are, like a little summary report that's like 2012 through 2018. And that's on the website. But we're going to take all of the new cases that we just got, which we don't have all of them, the charging documents from yet, and create more like a book.
Great.
I actually want to create a book about like the history of Alaska's prostitution laws and
Yeah.
like, I have like some historic cases that I got at the law library in Juneau of like the first Mann Act cases that were charged in Fairbanks back in the day in like 1905 or something.
Yeah.
And all of the constitutional challenges to the prostitution and sex work laws, because Alaska has actually been really progressive. Alaska was the first state that found manifesting prostitution laws unconstitutional. And Alaska was, I believe, one of the first states to find that the prostitution law was unconstitutional because it was not equal. It didn't treat men and women equally. And then we're one of the first states as well to find that strippers are employees and should be paid and should not be charged crazy house fees.
I love
I
that.
remember.
So yeah, I want to put all of that in a book, but we're all very busy.
Yeah, I don't have so much time in a day. Now, the way you were laying everything out, it made me more intrigued about the history as well. And so I was like curious if there was a place I could go. So naturally, but glad that's in progress.
Yeah, subscribe to our newsletter.
I will.
It takes quite some time. The FOIA request that I had done, I think, took like 9 months. And then all those cases that you just sent over to me to go pull, those are the ones that you just got back, right, Tara?
Yeah. Which I haven't. I know you've got a bunch of them, but I think only the Anchorage ones.
Yeah,
but I haven't had time to look at them yet.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I sent like 8 of those to you out of I think 12 or something. So there's a whole bunch. We have some work to do.
Rachel, are you an Alaska person?
No, I am not. I am actually a New York person, but I was just in Alaska.
So you'll be interested, Rachel, in a report that I wrote for Coyote, Rhode Island that summarizes 20 years of their promoting prostitution and sex trafficking statute. So if you go to coyoteri.org and then click on our research, it'll be, it's called Prostitution and Prostitution Related Charges, like 2000 through 2020 or something like that.
Oh, wow. Great. Coyote.ri.org.
No, take out that first stop.
Oh, got it. Okay.
Oh, Bella just put a link to the report for you in the chat.
Oh, great. Okay, the first one took me to an organization and I was like, this is very interesting, but I think I'm on the wrong page. Okay, thank you. Oh, amazing. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
It's so quiet with Maxine not feeling well. Poor. Let me call. Sorry. Any other questions or sorry, my phone is it's blowing up all of this a sudden here. Okay, never mind. I was also thinking how legislative session went when you were talking about when we're thinking anytime I think about sex workers being charged, and then I hear about things since we have plenty of time, which is the first time that we've actually not like had to go over in any way. But I was thinking about the whole Brian Stephen Smith murder trial and conviction and the things that he had stated in that interrogation. And it still runs through my brain how he was saying, how he was telling the police at that interrogation that prostitutes would be the easiest to kill because, we are out there alone. But then he was like, he took that back and said, actually, they have pimps or whatever. And I think back of when I started working in 2004, like that whatever is what enabled me to feel safe. And when you were talking about the woman with the massage parlor and how they're able to keep the door ajar, like I miss that relative safety. Working while I was going to the trial and everything else, it really it can be scary sometimes working alone. And I
Yeah.
miss days that I wasn't fearful.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Do you feel like new laws have made it that you have to be alone? Like it's not possible to work more together and have that support?
Yeah,
Absolutely.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Before 2012, I live in the woods in the middle of nowhere. And before 2012, I would go to Anchorage one weekend a month to work, and I would stay with other sex workers when I went. I would stay with, a couple different people, and I could bring my dogs and we would go on dog walks and stuff. But I would email all of my customers. I would be like, hey, I'm going to be staying with so and so, and like you could do a duo with us. If you haven't met her, it would be a great time for you to meet her. She would email all of her clients and do the same thing. And I really never met clients without being introduced to them by people who already knew them. And I never worked without having a friend in the next room and dogs, and as soon as the law passed, I saw it in the news and I read it and I said, I can't stay with you guys anymore. Like, I'm not going to be the one who puts you in jail for a felony. And everybody was like, oh no, that'll never happen. They're going after the bad guys. They're going after the people who are actually hurting people, like the pimps. And I was like, I don't think so. So for me, that meant that like suddenly I would go to Anchorage, I'd be staying in a hotel in the summer. The hotels are like $300 a night.
Yeah.
So if I don't have like several clients a day book, then I'm not really making any money after I pay to get down there and for hotel rooms and food and stuff. And when we would stay with each other, I guess it was just kind of like this, the normal standard was like, if I worked in somebody's room, I would give them some money for each call that I did there. But also, so there would be times where I would be there for a couple of days and not work at all, and I wouldn't pay them anything. But and then in addition, I lost that extra advertising of always being working with other people who were, established and lived there and had a lot of clients. So I had to start advertising harder on the internet, and I had to start screening clients and meeting them without really knowing that they were going to be okay. And because it was costing me so much more with hotel rooms and everything to be there, I felt like I had to see clients that I wouldn't have otherwise seen.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
That's a lot.
We've got a question from Bella. She says, can you talk about the data that reveals that when sex workers try to report a violent crime, they are often arrested, threatened with arrest, or police refuse to take the reports?
Yeah, so we have a book coming out at Coyote. So I'm part of CUSP, and I also work as Coyote's research and policy director. So we have a book coming out in a couple months, and it will have a lot of participatory action research around sex work in it. And one of the things that will be in there from several different surveys, because we have several different surveys now where we've asked people, you know, have you tried to report a crime to the police that you were a violent crime that you were a victim or witness of while you were working? And what happened? Were you arrested? Were you treated very well and they took your report? Did they threaten to arrest you? What happened, right? And so the numbers actually are changing over time, and some of them are just very different in different states. But what seems to be really consistent across the board is that when reporting a violent crime, people who have been victims of force, fraud, or coercion within the sex industry are twice as likely to be arrested when reporting the crime, twice as likely to be threatened with arrest, or twice as likely that they just won't take reports from them. Which, you know, I think is because the same kind of marginalizations that lead to somebody being targeted for abuse within the sex industry are, you know, the same things that make police officers also target them to say, you know, I can't take your report unless I arrest you for prostitution too, or to actually arrest them.
Although here in Alaska, we do have immunity to report.
Oh yeah, so that was how we got our immunity law. Was I went to UAF, I got a master's degree, I did that research, and I took that research to Juneau. And the legislators were quite shocked because they'd had the police all in there telling them how they rescue us and we love to be arrested because that's how they save us. So they were very surprised when we showed up and said, we had, you know, stories and numbers about, you know, people being arrested or threatened with arrest when they were trying to report actual violent crimes like sex trafficking and murder. And that was how we ended up with the immunity law in 2015.
Yeah. And
Or
then
2016.
2016, and then municipality in 2017, the Anchorage municipality, which we had to go do separately with opposition. And not many people still know about the immunity.
Yeah.
Do many
Yeah,
other
we need more media about. Sorry, what?
Oh, sorry. I was gonna say, do many other states have that immunity law or clause?
So we were the first, and Alaska's been the model for other states. And I made an immunity toolkit for you, Rachel, and
Oh,
Bella just put a link to
Thanks,
it in the
Bella.
chat. And so
That was
that information with the language from all the different states that have passed it since is in the immunity toolkit.
Amazing.
Maxine had text or chatted, yes, the sex trafficking laws are trying to starve us out.
Yeah.
I feel it
And
too.
sadly, a lot of the things that they do, you know, like the stings that they're doing on customers right now, it actually makes business a little bit better for established workers who've been in the industry a long time, and the clients know that we have good security practices and that we're not police. But it's the women who are less established in the industry and have, you know, a shorter reputation whose business is really, really damaged. And those are typically the people who actually need the money the most.
Right.
Yeah. Any other thoughts?
Oh, thank you, Bella.
Aw. Yeah, we're all three of us just so involved in a bunch of other things right now. So it's interesting. Yeah. If we had another week, like we would have been able to put all of those ones that were just pulled that we haven't even had time to go through.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
Yeah,
I
we
know,
gotta go to the house. So
and I know next month on August 20th, we're going to be talking about sex trafficking of minors in Alaska. And that will be the last session. That's going to be the last one for the summer education session. Although we will have all of those on the website and be able to, have those so people can watch them at any time on demand.
oh, we did talk about that, Bella. We showed an example, remember? Amber, are we gonna do
What?
do another webinar about BS, or are we not doing?
No, we haven't planned that yet. Yeah, I need to figure out what I can and cannot say still. But, so Bella had talk about engaging in sex acts with women during vice stings. They have not been doing that in Alaska since you had written about that.
No.
Unless there's some other things going on. I mean, there is word on the street that it's happening again, but we
Yeah,
don't have any.
we know that it's happening, but what they've done is they've stopped actually arresting people and filing the charge.
Yeah.
Because when they charge them with prostitution, I get the record. I'm like, oh, who do I know that knows this person? And I call them up. I'm like, hey, what happened when the cops arrested you? And then we show up down in Juneau and we're like, hey, listen to her, what the cops did to her when they were rescuing her from sex trafficking by arresting her. So they haven't been doing those kinds of stings and actually arresting people, but they are still doing the stings, and we do still know that that's happening.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm not going to say anything about that right now.
Yeah.
I do want to say there was a woman that was connected to my case back in 2014 who she was from Juneau originally, and she came up to work and she got into, like, her and another woman went out drinking. They were in their 30s. They went out drinking. They had a little tiff and she went back to Juneau, but she had called the police because they got into an altercation. And after I was arrested, this was about a month and a half before I was arrested. After I was arrested, they did go to Juneau and they set up a sting to question her about being sex trafficked, which seemed insane to me and very harmful to her. And I could tell, I read the charging documents. I kind of read the reports and things like that, and I could not understand why they did that in such a way. And I think that they even they did have like some sexual contact with her, if not to completion, which is very harmful. So
Yeah,
that
in
was
the recording. Sorry, go ahead.
No, and that was so harmful. But yes, there is a recording. There
Yeah.
are some links on there. Some of them are broken, but there are quite a few links of that similar engagement from police.
Yeah, in the recording of that encounter, you can hear the officer moaning and you can hear him saying, like, oh my God, can you feel my heartbeat down there? And stuff like that. But the state troopers did tell us that there actually was not even just no sexual contact, but no physical contact, I think they said, during that encounter. So I'm not sure what they thought he was referring to about his feeling his heartbeat, if there was no contact. But and they also said in there, that they could have just called her up because she called them and told them she was the victim of a sex crime. And they could have just, you know, called her up and set up like a meeting with her, with an advocate, like they might have done if she had not been a sex worker. But because she was a sex worker, they did this sting so that they could hold this over her head and make her testify to avoid being charged herself, which she was worried about her mother finding out that she was a sex worker. And they told her, you know, if you change your mind and don't cooperate with us, there's nowhere you can go to hide from us. It doesn't matter how far you go, we're going to find you. And yeah, it's just a crazy way to follow up with somebody who's been the victim, who, you know, called 911 and said they were the victim of a sex crime.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, well, we are at 7:59. Look at that. Covered a
The
few
first
different
time
things.
First time we've been on time.
Right? I know, it kind of feels good. So I am going to stop recording. Whoops. My mouse is not working for me here. All right.